Good evening, everyone. My name is H. Melt. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm an employee at Women and Children First Bookstore, which is hosting tonight's event via Crowdcast. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which Women and Children First sits is the occupied territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux people. There are over 75,000 indigenous people of many nations in Illinois. We strive to recognize and honor Native histories, literature, and communities, and we encourage you to research whose land you're on in your own homes and communities. Women and Children First, which is located in Chicago, is now open every day from 11 to 6. We are also processing online orders that can be shipped or picked up in store every single day. We are hosting many virtual events like this one, which are all listed on our website, womenandchildrenfirst.com. For example, tomorrow, you may not know, is Bookstore Romance Day. So we will be celebrating romance books all day tomorrow. And our next author event is this Tuesday with Nnedi Okorafor, who has a new middle grade novel. Tonight, we are honored to be celebrating Women in Translation Month and Kristen Renee Miller's new book, Spawn. Please put any questions you have throughout the evening into the Q&A box. Please also take note of the Buy the Book button at the bottom of your screen. We have not only Kristen's book, Spawn, but also books by all of tonight's readers on our shelves, including Joyous Science and Reenactments. Also, if you order Spawn from Women and Children First, you get this amazing, very large temporary tattoo of the cover of Kristen's book. Who does not want that? I personally love temporary tattoos, so this will be going onto probably my wrist later. So I am going to turn it over to the host for the evening, Derek Mong, who will be our MC. Thank you so much, everyone.
Oh, hello. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much, H-Melt. Welcome to one of the best-named bookstores in America, broadcasting to you in the midst of National Women in Translation Month, August, which is a good time to celebrate Spawn, Kristen Renee Miller's wonderful translation of Marie-Andrée Gill's poetry. My name is Derek Mong. I'm really honored to introduce tonight's translators. Anne O. Fisher, who's trying to hide over here in the corner, Hai-Dang Phan, and Kristen herself, who will share works from Russian, Vietnamese, and French, respectively. At a moment when we've all been forced to redefine our ideas of community and speech and travel, I think this lineup reminds us that when you're stuck at home with nothing but your library, literary translators are essential workers if you want to get away. I say this as someone who admires translators for their altruism. These are folks who pledge hours and expertise to another writer's work. They do so with little recognition and almost no remuneration, though I do encourage you to click this wonderful little button down here that says buy the book. That will help with a little bit of the remuneration. And I say this as someone who sees translation as presupposing literary community, as built right upon it. It's built on a trio, poet, translator, and reader, instead of a pair, poet and reader alone. Translators work against the myth of the writer as a solitary genius. They rely on native speakers, subject specialists, and literary friends to complete their very important task. They must, by nature, embrace humility. Translation is the art of choosing one's regrets, Joanna Trzezik-Huss writes, one of my favorite quotes about translation. I agree 100%. You can't complete the process without losing at least something along the way. At a moment when we are all losing something, some of us a lot, some of us not as much, I think translation has quite a bit to teach us. Altruism, community, humility, these are qualities that won't just help you finish a translation, they might just get you through a pandemic. I'm incredibly excited to hear what everyone has to share tonight. And I'm going to start by introducing the woman to my right, Anne O. Fisher, who is a Russian English literary translator whose works include Ilf and Petrov's two satirical novels, The Little Golden Calf and The 12 Chairs, Ksenia Buksha's The Freedom Factory, and The Joyous Science, selected poems of Maxime Emelian, winner of the Cliff Becker Translation Prize. She co-translated that one with me, her husband. She's a past recipient of both NEA and NEH grants, and is a senior lecturer at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee's program in Translation and Interpreting Studies. She's also the very hardworking vice president of ALTA, the American Literary Translators Association. And I'll turn it over to her now. Thank you, everybody.
That was very sweet. Thank you. Congratulations, Kristen, on Spawn. Thank you to H. Melt and Women in Children's Books for this wonderful, Women in Children First, for this lovely experience. I'm going to read an excerpt from a prose poem / nightmare about the end of the world, as told from the point of view of the supervisor or upravdom of a large apartment building in St. Petersburg, Russia. It's called Danil the Super, and it is by Ksenia Buksha, translated by me, Annie Fisher. I told them over and over again, these days you can't do that anymore. You need food. You need water. You need to guard the supplies. They didn't listen to me, not one fucking word. They set fire to the new electrical line, stuffing their faces the whole time like, I don't know what, dug up some booze, stole some food, locked themselves in back on the 15th. Well, who cares? They're just trash. People like that are useless these days. Never gave a thought to their souls. They'd have only gone on and sinned even more. So you could say I really just saved them. Letting them live would have been really just immoral. So me and the lady from apartment 68 were talking about when the time comes to do what they gave us those pills for. When they issued them a year and a half ago, there was a wave of suicides. And some people even thought that was exactly why they gave them out, to get rid of the excess population. All those whiners, the I'm so depressed slackers who couldn't do anything anyway. But time's ticking away, see? And everybody still got their pills, everybody but the ones who sold them for food. And so now the question, arises, when is it time? The authorities didn't inform us of this, left it up to our own judgment. They must have predicted that at some point we'd just know, all at once. Although we did know, just not all at once. Or rather, we've known for a long time now, but we don't know when exactly. There's nothing about this in the instructions. So here we are, sitting and waiting. Personally, I think you have to, if it's like a kid, if a kid is suffering unbearably, like if a kid's got a bad infection or something. But that lady from apartment 68, she says there's no way she's going to kill children on the government's orders. She says to just go on ahead and die, however we die. Just go on ahead and drown, or starve, or freeze, or whatever. Although we all know there's a fat chance of freezing now. Fat chance of freezing now. But the main thing is just to let it take its course. That's the important part. Even if we all do suffer a little, everyone has suffered after all. The Middle Ages had its apocalypse too. The plague, for instance. And there were other things earlier. It's been proven. I don't know how I can be so sure. Maybe I'm just an idiot, of course. But I firmly believe this. Because the main thing isn't how it all goes down. The main thing is that I'm the one responsible for the building. Because I'm basically like the building supervisor. If somebody didn't crank the generator enough, that's my fault. If there's no clean water, it's my fault. Or if we run out of ammo and we're robbed. But as for this climate scheme, now I'm not so sure that's my fault. It was that thing where they pumped all that dang gas into the atmosphere. It's all because of that. They wanted to make things better, but they made things even worse. They could have just let it slide. We'd have made it another 100 years, maybe 200. But no, they decided to make some money on it. Profit from everyone's fear, from the climate panic. I didn't vote for them at the referendum. That referendum was shit anyway. Carousel voting, ballot stuffing. Even back then, I wouldn't touch plastic bags. Even back when everyone figured, oh, it's okay, it's so convenient. I basically tell everybody not to panic. Everything's okay. The end of the world is okay. There's nothing to be worried about. It was all preordained, decided in advance. The ones who created this climate scheme are burning in hell now. And as for us, well, we'll live out our lives the way we want. Yeah, about those drunks from the 5th floor. So basically, before we recycled them, we displayed them to the sect in apartment 29. They have a commune in there, 118 people in it, all cultists. And there's even pregnant women, which is taking it too far, no doubt about it. They shouldn't have permitted that level of optimism. But they do have a hydroponic farm, and that's good. It's been really tricky to restock our supplies lately. First of all, keeps getting hotter and hotter. And also, out in that new sun, you can see your skin burning in it, even under your clothes. And secondly, everything's run out. The water is getting worse. We really have to look for it, give out smaller portions. That's the reality of it. And thirdly, there's no masks. Haven't been for a long time now. I'm not so sure that a scarf is a good enough replacement for a stench like this. But those are little things. We can deal with them. So basically, we go over there. Roma's standing there holding a drunk's head. Jamshed's standing there holding a drunk's head. And I'm standing there with a lady drunk's head, holding it by the hair. And at that point, I kind of flipped out, of course. As soon as they saw me, they all stood and started chanting, thundering in unison, Daniel, Daniel, be our king. Here in the ravaged city, destroy the flow of time. Make it curl up and swallow itself whole. Make it feel hard, black, and endless from 1 minute to the next. Make it feed us. Make it defend and protect us here in the ravaged city. Time is all we have left. Time is our food. Time is our weapon. Inside every endless minute, which has curled up into itself, be our king, Daniel. And I'm standing there with the lady's head. I'm standing there, and I want to tell them something useful, something practical. I could have told him a lot of things, but I keep not speaking. And the pause keeps getting longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Hai-Dang Phan is an associate professor at Grinnell College, a 2017 NEA Fellow in Creative Writing, and the author quite recently of the poetry collection Reenactments for Sale Tonight from the lovely Sarah Band Books. His translations of Phan Nien Hao's new and selected poems, Paper Bells, appeared this year. His poems and translations have been published widely. The New Yorker, New England Review, Asymptote, Best American Poetry 2016. Born in Vietnam, he grew up in Wisconsin, where he returned to take his PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We're so excited to welcome him.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. I'm coming out of quarantine. This is my first virtual reading, and I'm really happy to join everyone to celebrate Kristen's translation. Congratulations to Kristen and the poet Marie-Andrée Gill. I'm going to read from Paper Bells. I'll just read 4 poems from this collection by Phan Nien Hao, contemporary Vietnamese poet who came to the US in 1991 when he was 24. He lives in Illinois, but writes his poems in Vietnamese and conducts most of his everyday life in English. A lot of the poems I'll be reading, just 4 from this book, deal with exile, everyday life in exile, and I think that's something that speaks to our condition right now during the pandemic, as feelings of exile, as if we're exiled from our own lives. I'll read the title poem, Paper Bells. The paper bells hanging from the ceiling make no sound. Summer has begun. I stand naked in the afternoon, in the middle of the yard, watching my shadow flowing like ink from my feet, a piece of night. A 1-story house holding 60,000 gallons of gasoline. My head is aflame, throwing open the door to each blaze. My spirit can't take flight. The paper bells make no sound. And the next poem is called Manufacturing Poetry. I'll try to read the first in Vietnamese and then the translation. Chế tạo thơ cả. Một bữa chiều không có việc gì làm, tôi ngồi chế tạo ra thơ cả. Chỉ bằng 16 con ốc, 2 tấm kim loại, 4 bánh xe. Nó được đổ đầy nhiên liệu, hơn hộp của xung đột, hy vọng, tình yêu và sự vô ích. Đủ sức chạy từ Mỹ sang tàu trong một đường hầm tối ôm xuyên tầm trái đất. Đường hầm mà trước đó không lao số phận đã được trồng một con cương. Manufacturing Poetry. On an afternoon with nothing to do, I sit manufacturing poems. Out of 16 screws, 2 metal plates, and 4 wheels. Poems fueled by a mix of strife, hope, love, and futility. Enough to run from America to China in a pitch-black tunnel bisecting the Earth's core. Blasting open fate, I tunnel deep. This next poem is timely, although it was written in 2009. It's called Wash Your Hands. Hope we're all still doing that. Wash your hands, and not touching your face like I just did. Wash your hands. From here, inside and outside look all the same to me. This half and that half are evenly pale. Winter shoveling snow, a game of flies in the tropics. The swampy city, a breeding ground for mosquitoes, where breasts are squeezed in the beer halls until broken and thrown into the bloody river with hyacinths. Last night, I dreamt of the dead picking up cans, not for cash, but to use as incense holders all along Highway 1 from the south to the north. People, this is no trivial matter. Another story about art for art's sake or art for life. This is the story about a cut the length of decades, about an incestuous history spawning pig humans who buried people alive. Sometimes I push the door open onto the future, but the counterfeit past snuffs out the present. I say, open, open, flush, flush, to all of us eating where we shit. Let's put down our bowls and take a walk instead. The young, the old, and the well-fed. There's still time, if only a few moments, to wash your hands before escorting your souls, embarking for the afterlife, baggage and all. Here's a bit of, I'll end with a poem about some writing advice, which we all can use anytime. Instructions for writing. Write sharply like a nail driven into a plank. Write swiftly like wind blowing through a plague. Write quietly like coals burning inside the earth. Write fiercely like a wounded lion on the brink of death. Write cautiously like a train plowing through a foggy morning. Write sensitively like a dragonfly before a storm. Write pleasure all over the sand, then connect the dots. Write sorrow on the water, let waves do the carrying. Write solitude onto a lantern, keeping vigil until the light burns out. It's possible to write briefly, but don't skip verbs. Stagnancy will sink punctuation marks. Write after dusk, but not at dawn. That's when the ghosts return after collecting more spirit money. Write prolifically when drunk, but once sober, throw it all into the river and try not to brag about your intoxications. Write for the dead, but don't invite the funeral band because synthetic music suffocates the corpse. It's fine to write aimlessly, but don't be careless. Keep language in its solid state with a high melting point. Write far below zero like a winter day in Oymacon. Write sweating bullets like summertime in Dalal. Write in the style of the New York School or Prairie. Both are cool, but don't dance around with a stick, thinking no one can see you. Write hopelessly like waiting for the moon to fall on the roof and break into pieces. Write hopefully like when I waited for my wife to give birth at the hospital. Write unforgettably like in Bangkok 6 years ago when I saw a beautiful woman with 12 fingers. Write mysteriously like all the nights of my youth, listening to the symphony of the street merchants crying out. Write handsomely, but pay no attention to symmetry. Write gorgeously, but avoid cheap face powder. Write in the middle of a crowd, standing alone, a do not disturb sign around your neck. When the nameless are executed in the city's square, write their faces in blood and never wash your hands. Not until freedom spreads like soap bubbles from scrubbing history's shameful spots. Thank you so much.
That is lovely and moving. The final image is so evocative. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I'm going to introduce our final reader for the night. Kristen Renee Miller, the woman of the hour, lives in Louisville, Kentucky, where she's the managing editor of Saraban Books. Her poems and translations have appeared in Poetry, the Kenyon Review, Guernica, and Best New Poets 2018. She's received grants and awards from the Kennedy Center and the Humana Festival, among others. And her first collection is why we're here. Marie-Andrée Gill's Spawn, just out now from Book Hug Press in Canada. It's a marvelous book, part Lorene Niedecker, part Louise Erdrich, though even that's a bit reductive the way I've described it, that implicitly compares teenage hijinks to the life cycle of salmon. I finished it in one sitting just a couple nights ago. It was wonderful. The title is pitch perfect. Spawn, something salmon do and teenagers become. Spawn of the devil, you might hear said of these poems' speaker, spawn of the lake, whose, quote, flashing waves, Miller translates, revive humanity, one drop at a time. I'm very much looking forward to this.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Derek. I first encountered Lorene Niedecker in your class so many years ago, so that's a very lovely and generous comparison. Thank you, Annie, for that incredible reading. Thank you, Hai-Dang. Thanks for coming out of quarantine for me and my book. And thanks to each of you who are here tonight. It's lovely to see your little avatars in the corner of the screen. And I'm very excited and grateful to get to launch Spawn with all of you tonight and to share a little bit from the book. I hope you'll indulge me and not mind. I usually try to keep my commentary outside of the reading to a minimum, but I feel like this work deserves a little bit of a preamble. So I'm going to take a moment to talk about it before I begin reading. I often struggle with how to start talking about Spawn because I spent so long with it under a microscope, and to me it's just so many different things. So I'm going to describe to you how I first encountered the book, and I hope that that helps shape and inform how you first encounter the book. I first picked up a copy of Marie-Andrée Gill's book Frayé in a bookstore in Montreal. As a poet and editor, I love extreme compression. And so when I saw the oh, that page shows all my notes. When I saw the highly minimal work, I was immediately intrigued by her poetry. And when I flipped it open to a middle page, this was the first line I read. Lécher la surface de l'eau avec la langue que je ne parle pas, which translates to lick the skin of the water with a tongue I don't speak. It's a line about having an intimate connection by way of an unfamiliar medium. And so as somebody reading that line in a second language, I felt this immediate sense of recognition, which is what you hope for as a reader. So I bought the book. And later on, as I was reading the whole collection and researching Guy's Indigenous heritage, I recognized how central this line was to her whole work. There's a special urgency apparent here about language, which is tied to both intimacy and nature. And these emerged as really central themes of the collection. So for my reading tonight from Spawn, I've selected a handful of poems that draw upon those themes. To lick the skin of the water with a tongue I don't speak. The day lifts me up on his shoulders to watch the varnish half stripped from our memories, the cement pelt poured over our feral skins. How to augur anything but crooked miracles, anyway. A luck, the arena at night, and making out behind the police station, the northern lights dancing on Nintendo, chicken buckets, the monthly allowance, Happy Meals from nobody's birthday, and weekends in the woods, and partridges to twist, and the lake, a luck, the lake. In houses all alike, women embroider your future on moccasins sold to tourists. The light comes and goes. Timisham says, only thunderstorms still tell it like it is. I got up early to watch the sun fuck with the lake. I pinched an eyelash in my fingers, drank your face straight from the bottle. The possibilities have become too much for me. How do you swallow the lake's beauty with all these ghosts chewing through its plastic-filled lung? I'm in the underwater level of a video game, just as the air runs out, just as that little tune begins to play. I want the America that cries out in your voice. I want our plundered bloods, our earth-colored powwow bloods rising in her throat when she sees us queuing for the microwave. Balsam fir dance in slow motion, and the earth shudders as I come, as my fingers find the burning ember. I want this vertigo as a vow, to sap the cruel beauty of oil-slick rainbows. The little heart closes like a dandelion in darkness. Seagulls tread water in the wind of your badlands, of your brush fires, of your hands around my neck. Sometimes the sky pulls down his starry leggings and comes hot in the lake's wide mouth. It's always there, that color of mixed diesel pulsing through the two-stroke organs of our winter bunkers. And when the night draws its celebrations to a close, the hares undress all alone, sexes smeared from long storms. Perhaps we've forgotten that the body, yes, the body, finds a desolate kind of beauty once exposed. And I should preface, this begins with the name of the freshwater salmon in Ilnu, which is the indigenous traditional language of Gill's community, Wananish. Wananish revived the watercolors of our blooming organs. Time to swallow the evidence of our mutant hides. Splitting the surface of the lake, stripping the pelt from its shoulders, where sweetwater salmon drink the milk of our fallow hearts. We cut our teeth on weapons. I know we are blue plumage, the symmetry of spruce, the language of hailstones. So that's Spawn. I love it. I hope you do too. Is that a strange thing to say? I'm going to move on. I'm so excited because I am currently working on Guy's latest book, Chauffer le dehors, which is brand new, published last year, and which just won the Indigenous Voices Award for Poetry. So awesome. Awesome work, Marie-Andrée. Very cool book. It explores interiority and exteriority, heartbreak and decolonial love, and it's very fresh. So I wanted to share a few short pieces from this work. A caress without purpose, a splicing of limbs, a dust kitten on the floor, a room closed off in fall, a scab torn off, regrown. I lay my remains on the stove and all my birds hide themselves away to die. I carve the birds for supper, as I would do to you, but in reverse. Graft onto you articulated wings and full-throated cries, so you could see the savage flowers of my raw heart, the 1,000-year medicine that envelops us. Even if the future shrugs its shoulders and untangles its threads quietly but not quickly, I know we will disappear to some place other than the sky, someplace we've unzipped wide enough to inhabit. It's enough to make me disarrange the furniture, let out the cat, and lie down in wait for the mountain, taking its slow walk across the millennia, even as blowflies blossom at last from my belly. I want to close out my reading with a hybrid poem that's not in Spawn, but that draws from a poem in Spawn. Those of you who have translated know that the finished translated poem is really a tiny fragment of the exchange that's taken place between languages. So I made this poem in order to demonstrate and unpack the process of translating just 3 lines of one of Gill's poems. And what I hope that it shows is the richness of possibility in her work and the kind of limitless unfolding that can take place in translation, even though it was my job ultimately to cut it back down to 3 lines of poetry in English. This is a 25-line poem. Nous nous baignons dans le mal de vivre. We bathe ourselves in the mal de vivre. Nous nous baignons, we wade in, we swim, we submerge, dans le mal de vivre, in the misery, the unhappiness. We submerge in profound discontentment. We bathe in the malaise de l'asphalte chaude, in the noxious bloom of a newly paved lot. In the malaise of hot asphalt, we bathe. Nous nous baignons dans le mal de vivre de l'asphalte chaude. Hot asphalt is the water we swim through, en attendant de trouver la parole, looking for a word habitable, for a home-like, habitable word, a sustainable language, en attendant de trouver la parole habitable ou de gagner quelque chose au râteau, looking for a landfall, a windfall, a lottery win. Hot asphalt is the water we tread as we wait for parole habitable, for a language to shelter in. Thank you so much. I think we will go ahead and transition to Q&A.
Was there a mic on?
That's how it was on, and everybody heard us moving on.
Yeah.
It was so wonderful.
Yeah. Hello. Well, I could start with a question of my own. I don't see anyone yet in the chat. There's a place where you can ask a question, it looks like, at the bottom of your screen. And everyone, I suspect, is much better at that than I am, being the Luddite that I am. But let me start with this. This is a question that I wrote beforehand. Many writers who've been interviewed since this pandemic began talk about the things that they can or can't do since our lives all changed. They can't read lyric poetry anymore, or they can't write it. They can't read the news, or they can't stop. I'd be really curious. Oh, thank you, Annie. I'd be really curious what all of our readers tonight can or can't do, or how the pandemic has changed for you, your translations. What is maybe harder to do, or harder to accomplish, or easier? Is translation something that you want to go to more in the midst of this particular moment, or is it something that you flee from and work on other things? Maybe it hasn't been effective.
That's an awesome question. I'm happy to kick off. I think for me, translation is such an absorbing practice. It really occupies every corner of your brain all at the same time. And it's a wonderful retreat from reality to have your brain engaged in, in the analytical, in the intuitive, in the musical, all at the same time. I have a toddler, so I don't have a lot of time to devote to it. But when I get the chance, and I have to shout out my husband who sent me away to the woods for a weekend to work on poems, which yay. It is a wonderful retreat from everything else to be able to be absorbed in this case, in Marie-Andrée's work.
I can try to answer that from my experience, Derek. It's an interesting question, what I can or what you can or cannot do during the pandemic as a literary translator, as a poet or writer, as a person. I think we've talked about fatigue. I think there's a kind of, what bandwidth you personally have. The part of the bandwidth I currently have at the moment is maybe sharing this work, sending it out to people in the mail. To be honest, I haven't been able to do much of pursue some of my own writing or in terms of poetry and translation. But one of the things I can do is share the work and participate. This is the first reading I've participated in, so maybe I can do more of this. But I've sort of used this time and my bandwidth to kind of retreat into a sort of new space of things beginning again, learning how to see what's close to me and write about it, whether mostly now it's kind of in notebooks and prosy forms. But so that's sort of what my current bandwidth has allowed me to do. And that's partly a function of the Paper Bells coming out in April. So right when this was, it seems like ages ago, but right when it was, we're in the middle of it, still in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm. Should I say something? Oh, well, I find I have both more time and less time. I have more to do and more things to do, but less time to do them in. But somehow I'm doing more projects and being more productive while getting less done. Does this make any sense? I don't know how this is working, but I'm finding I'm speaking more with my authors that I am, interested in working on than ever before. So I'm hoping that there will be a positive, end to the pandemic. I'm hoping there will be an end to the pandemic, and then I'm hoping it will be a positive end. Okay.
I'll ask one other question. Maybe some other folks will. Never mind. I see one in the chat. We'll run to that. I'm much more interested in what other people have to ask than what I would. Maybe you see this already. A question for Kristen from Anthony Blake. I'm curious to know what else you were reading while you were translating Spawn, and whether that influenced how you translated. I feel like we often ask writers about outside influences on their practice, but seldom ask translators. That's a lovely observation. I like that a lot.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that question. And I'm immediately going to fail by not drawing to mind one poet in particular who I think did inform Marie-Andrée Gill's voice in English for me somewhat. She published with Poetry Society of America chapbook contest, and I can picture the cover perfectly right now, but not her name. So I will look for that and type it in. But I was reading really widely, and I found this particular poet whose voice did strike me as this kind of cool girl, ironic, kind of funny, but in a darkly comic way, voice that was raw at the same time that it was highly kind of refined from a sonic perspective. And I saw all of those things happening in Guy's work as well. She has this offhanded style that when you start to dissect it, begins revealing all of its intricacies and all of the attention that only is discovered once you start peeling it back, once you have to, dismantle it and rewrite it in a language with completely different words. But yeah, I started imagining her as this kind of, she's kind of like this it girl poet of Francophone Canada. So in a lot of ways, I felt a little uncool around her every time I approached her book. But yeah, I found a wonderful poet who had her chapbook out through the Poetry Society of America, whose name I'm blanking on completely. And I will try to find and post about that, because I think her voice did really inform the voice that I created for Gill in English.
Thank you. I have another question through the question feature. This is also for Kristen. Kelsey, who I think, yes, okay, yeah, it's the Kelsey we know. Sorry. Kelsey writes, Kristen, I know zero French are luck, lake, luck, lack, similar words, or was that a kind of bonus in the English translation?
It is not as similar in French as it is in English. And let me just reference to make sure that I tell you the proper thing. Yes, so the word that I was translating for a luck was une chance, which could be translated a number of different ways. It could really easily be absorbed into colloquial English. You could translate it as a lake. At least we have the lake, which it was in an earlier draft. Une chance le lac could be at least we have the lake, or thank God for the lake, or so on and so forth in colloquial French. I immediately ruled out thank God for the lake, because I think that would not at all fit with the spirit in which the book is written. And for a while, I left it as at least we have the lake, because I think it does kind of imply more of the perspective that this is coming from. But it didn't really cover the specialness of that phrase. Une chance appears more than almost any other kind of idiomatic phrase in the book. It comes up, I think, in 4 separate places in 3 poems. And I wanted to draw attention to the specialness of it. And so I chose the phrase, a luck, the lake. It's a phrase that I have seen used from time to time that struck me as being something out of the ordinary, and something that makes you pause when you come to it. And I think each time you see this phrase in the text, you want to pause when you come to it. And so that was the reason that I selected that particular translation of it. And then it just so happened to be very close to the word lake, which to my ear chimed a little not harmoniously at first, but I grew to love it over time.
If anybody else would like to ask a question, please do. I can spot them in the chat or in the question area. I would like to ask, I'm going to ask one other that I think we can pose to all 3 of you. And this might be useful to anybody in the audience who is doing their own translation project or aspiring to do a translation project. What's the most difficult lesson that translation has taught you in the midst of doing it?
I can jump in with an immediate kind of facile answer, which is don't be too satisfied too quickly. You got to learn to use your, yellow highlight button or your bold or your italics or whatever, and just if you have the slightest whiff that something isn't there yet, mark it so you can come back to it. Because by the time you get to the end, you're going to forget what you wanted to go back to. Is that too nerdily, like small detail? But you have to develop that sort of spider sense for translation, where you know that it's not quite there yet. Keep going back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll even piggyback on the specificity of that and say that working in Google Docs was an absolute revelation for me with translation, because I could highlight and make comments on my own translation as I was going. So I could kind of keep a running tally of my own misgivings as I was even putting in, a line in translation, which is basically every line. My translator or my publishers will let you know if you ever speak to them how chronically indecisive I am. I'm told that that's due to my Mercury being in Libra, where you can just kind of see all the options all at once, and it's very paralyzing. But being able to take notes on my own lack of decision in real time is very helpful.
If I could come at this a little differently, I don't know if it was the most difficult lesson, but a lesson that it taught me, translation taught me, was a lesson about sort of letting go of an idea of originality or purity of a correct translation, and in a way that was both helpful for the act of translating. That didn't mean like anything goes. It actually meant that, as Annie was saying, the interpretation, the reading, the close reading comes in even more. But I was, Derek, I think you had mentioned earlier that translation is altruistic, and I would push back against that a little bit, partly because translating also taught me that it was doing something for me, right? I got to be a different kind of poet, different kind of writer. Translation helped me let go of my own sort of poet's idea of being original. It sort of taught me that, no, you're not original, or that you can end up writing a poem, your own poem, as it were, through all these other voices, through things you've inherited, through language that you hear on the street that comes from other people's mouths.
Yeah, absolutely. I found myself coming to translation in a way that the poet Randall Jarrell did, which was I was stymied by my own work, and it was translation that was a kind of another way to exercise some similar muscles, a way to sort of infuse someone else's voice into my own voice, and that often energized me to keep going. I look
to break the writer's block.
Yeah, in a way, that's sort of like, you know, usually when my students tell me that they have writer's block, I tell them, well, you just need to lower your standards. That's usually the sort of like number one thing to start to sort of get over that. Or, you know, find another voice. I mean, I think all translators are pretty adept at wearing masks. I mean, we're all kind of adept at wearing literal masks, but, you know, like the sort of dramatic monologue, sorry, I'm getting pushed by my wife. But the sort of dramatic monologue nature of being a translator, in a way, you're adopting someone else's voice. So, yeah, you know.
Oh, I'm back. Yeah, I just wanted to say I will often say that I'm sitting in the catbird seat because I have the best of both worlds. I never have to face the blank page, and yet I get to be as creative as I can be. So being the translator is the best.
This poem is actually good.
Right? You get to work on a good poem instead of a really crap poem all day.
I have one more question, so maybe we could possibly close with this. This is for Hai-Dang. Can you talk about the form of paper bells? Also from Kelsey.
The form? Well, there's the. Thank you for that question. There's the form of the book, which is a kind of grab bag collection of new and selected from across Hau's 2 collection published in Vietnamese and also new unpublished poems. The form of the poems themselves, each one is different. Each one's like a little key. The lines, I guess you would call it free verse. There's not a regular stanzaic pattern. His diction and his vernac and his voice is fairly plain. So for a reader and a heritage speaker like myself, that helps. So rather than working with a poet, say, who is syntactically complex or writes in these convoluted forms, his forms are fairly irregular, yet the lines are simple and clean, and that sort of helped me access the poems. He's translated American poets. He's read and translated American poets like William Carlos Williams, Creeley, and so there was another way in which we met, or I was able to meet him at the level of form in this kind of third space of familiar, common American poets that we had read, and I had sort of seen translation the other way influence his work, and so his poems in Vietnamese stand out in part because they themselves are like this confluence of influences, both the American, but also French, and also a kind of native, homegrown Southern Vietnamese poetry as well.
I think it being, well, it's 9 o'clock where I live, which basically means I should be in bed because I'm an old man with children. But it's 8 o'clock Central Standard Time. So unless anybody has anything else they'd like to add to close us out, maybe we could call it a night, shall we? I think we'll do that. Thank you, everyone, for reading. Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Hai-Dang. Thank you, Kristen. Congratulations so much on Spawn. Thank you, Women and Children First, for hosting us. Thank you, everybody, for coming to our virtual event. And we encourage you to buy Spawn and all these other wonderful books that are available to you to support this wonderful bookstore and the great work that translators do, kind of bridging the world's languages, bridging the world's literatures, making us all feel maybe a little closer together when we're all so far apart right now. So.
Thank you. And thank you, Derek, so much for hosting. This was really fun. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Write to your representatives this weekend about the post office.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You're very welcome, Kristen. It's been lovely.